If you think a tiny spreadsheet error can't destroy an entire career, wait until you hear this. One wrong Excel formula. One prettified number adjustment. And I brought down the most arrogant vice president our firm ever had. Cost him $76 million and his golden throne, the best part. He thought he was winning right until the very last second. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's best served in a conference room full of witnesses, with receipts. My name is Claire Mitchell, and after 12 years at North Point Advisory, I thought I'd seen everything corporate America could throw at me. I was wrong. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was hunched over my dual monitors in the glass fishbowl we called Conference Room C, finalizing the risk assessment for Vanguard Energetics, a deal worth hundreds of millions that could define our firm's next decade. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing market volatility indices with supply chain vulnerabilities. This wasn't just another report. This was the kind of analysis that kept companies from imploding. At 38, I'd earned my stripes. Head of Strategic Analysis wasn't a title they handed out with participation trophies. I'd built models that saved clients from bankruptcy, identified merger opportunities that created billions in value, and most importantly, I'd never been wrong about a major risk call. Not once. The conference room door slammed open. Mitchell, still buried in your spreadsheets. Evan Rourke stood in the doorway, his Tom Ford suit catching the morning light like armor. 6 months ago, he was nobody some hotshot from a competitor firm with a resume that looked better than it performed. Then he started sleeping with our CEO, Margaret Walsh, and suddenly he was vice president of strategic operations, my boss, technically, though he'd never earned the right to review my grocery list, let alone my work. Final review, I said, not looking up. The Vanguard presentation is tomorrow. He strutted over, cologne thick enough to choke on, and glanced at my screen. His laugh was sharp, performative, the kind meant for an audience. Right on cue. 3 junior analysts appeared in the doorway, drawn by the scent of workplace drama. Jesus, Claire, what is this? A doctoral thesis? He scrolled through my report with theatrical disgust. 40 pages of risk matrices, probability scenarios. Nobody wants to read Tolstoy at a business meeting. I kept my voice steady. Vanguard specifically requested comprehensive risk analysis. Their board doesn't make 9-figure decisions based on pretty pictures. See? That's your problem. He turned to our audience, playing to the crowd. This is why women overthink everything in business. Analysis paralysis. While you're calculating the probability of rain, men are already closing deals with umbrellas. The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Cut it down to 10 slides, he continued, now pacing like a TED Talk reject. Big fonts, bright colors, make it sell, not smell like a library, and lose all this academic bullshit about systemic vulnerabilities and cascade failure scenarios. You're scaring money away, not attracting it. I watched him delete 3 months of work with casual mouse clicks, each one erasing a carefully documented risk that could crater the entire project. My hand stayed steady on the desk, but inside, something shifted. Not rage was hot and reckless. This was colder, more precise. Of course, I said, my smile practiced from years of boardroom poker. I'll simplify it. Good girl. The condescension dripped like syrup. Have it ready by end of day. And Claire, try to remember we're selling dreams here, not nightmares. He left with his entourage, their snickers echoing down the hall. I sat alone in the fishbowl, surrounded by deleted warnings and discarded expertise. On my screen, the cursor blinked in an empty slide titled Revenue Projections. I minimized the presentation and opened a new folder, naming it Insurance. Then I began saving every original analysis, every deleted risk assessment, every email where Evan overrode my recommendations. Each file was time-stamped, authenticated, and backed up to my personal cloud. They wanted simple, I'd give them simple, but simplicity, I'd learned, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. You just had to know where to aim it. I pulled up Evan's simplified version and began working. Each slide was perfect, gorgeous, even, the kind of presentation that made executives feel smart for understanding it. but buried in the formatting metadata, in the calculation cells, in the version history, was a trail of breadcrumbs. Every change had Evan's digital fingerprints on it. By lunch, I'd created exactly what he wanted, a beautiful lie wrapped in corporate gift paper. And somewhere in that building, Evan Rourke was probably bragging about putting me in my place. He had no idea he'd just signed his own death warrant. The transformation of North Point Advisory under Evan's reign took exactly 3 weeks, like watching a virus spread through a network. His new thinking infected every department, every process, every decision, and I documented it all. Visual impact over analytical depth, he announced at Monday's all-hands meeting, standing at the podium like a discount motivational speaker. Clients don't want to think, they want to feel confident. Make them feel it. Behind him, Margaret Walsh nodded approval, her expression suggesting she felt something entirely different when looking at Evan. The rest of us sat in stadium seating, watching our company's IQ drop in real time. My new role, Presentation Enhancement Specialist. Evan's little joke that stuck. I was now responsible for making his hollow strategies look substantial, adding gradient backgrounds to mask missing data, creating animations to distract from logical gaps, designing charts that implied growth where none existed. "Claire, I need you to jazz up the Thornton proposal," he'd say, dumping another gutted analysis on my desk. "You know, make it pop." The Thornton proposal had originally contained 17 risk factors I'd identified through pattern analysis. By the time Evan finished with it, it promised 300% ROI with zero downside, a fantasy that would make Disney jealous. But I played along, smiled in meetings, nodded when he explained his vision, even complimented his tie once, a moment of performance art that nearly made me gag, all while building my archive emails, memos, recorded Zoom calls where he explicitly instructed teams to remove pessimistic projections. The breaking point came Thursday afternoon. Sarah Martinez, one of my junior analysts, knocked on my office door, her face pale. "Claire, I ran the numbers on the Vanguard deal using Evan's parameters." She handed me a printout, hands shaking slightly. "If these assumptions are wrong, we're not talking about missing targets. We're talking about contractual violations, potential lawsuits." I studied her calculations. Smart girl, she'd found what Evan had buried. The energy consumption projections he'd inflated by 400%, the infrastructure costs he'd deleted, the regulatory compliance issues he'd labeled unlikely contingencies that were actually near certainties. "What should I do?" Sarah asked. I looked at this brilliant 26-year-old whose career could be destroyed for telling the truth. "Nothing. File it in your personal records and forget you saw it." "But, Sarah, do you know what happens to whistleblowers in companies like ours?" She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. That night, I worked until 3 a.m., not on Evan's presentations, but on something else. I pulled every original document, every authentic analysis, every shred of evidence showing what our recommendations should have been. Then I created a parallel presentation, the real one, with actual data, genuine projections, and most importantly, clearly marked attribution showing who had altered what. I encrypted it, backed it up in 3 locations, and sent a copy to my personal attorney with instructions to open only if I requested it. Friday brought the final insult. Evan called an emergency meeting of senior staff, except I was told to sit this one out, and instead prepare the Vanguard presentation materials. Through the glass walls, I watched him hold court, gesturing wildly, his audience of yes-men nodding along. Later, Tom from IT, one of the few people still willing to talk to me honestly, filled me in. "He's restructuring the department," Tom whispered by the coffee machine. "Says analytical roles are being streamlined, Claire. I think he's planning to eliminate your position after the Vanguard deal closes." I stirred my coffee slowly, processing this information. "When?" "Next month. He's already interviewing replacements, kids fresh from MBA programs, who'll work for half your salary and won't question him." That evening, I did 2 things. First, I updated my insurance folder with Tom's information and a copy of the job postings Evan had secretly approved dated before the Vanguard presentation, proving premeditation. Second, I composed a message to Linda Carver, my old mentor at Vanguard Energetics. It had been 2 years since we'd spoken, but Linda had taught me everything about reading between corporate lines. She'd understand my subtext. Linda, hoping all is well. Looking forward to tomorrow's presentation. Note, I haven't been permitted final review of the numbers. There are elements requiring verification. Best, Claire. I hesitated before hitting send. Once this was in motion, there'd be no stopping it. But then I thought about Sarah's terrified face, about the 40 other employees whose analyses had been butchered, about the clients who'd lose millions based on Evan's ego-driven fiction. I clicked send. In his office, visible through the glass walls, Evan was on the phone with Margaret, feet up on his desk, laughing at something. He'd hung my original Vanguard report on his wall, 40 pages of professional analysis with a red X drawn across it in marker, a trophy of his conquest. He thought he'd won by silencing me, by reducing me to a PowerPoint decorator, by systematically dismantling everything I'd built. He was about to learn that silence wasn't submission, it was preparation. Memory is a strange thing in corporate life. We forget slights and humiliations to survive, but kindness, real kindness, burns itself into your mind forever. Linda Carver had given me that kindness 13 years ago when I was nobody, just another analyst drowning in Excel sheets and imposter syndrome. I was 25, presenting my first major assessment to Vanguard's board. Halfway through, I'd frozen, my mind blank, 40 executives staring at me like sharks scenting blood. Linda, then senior operations manager, had stood up and said, "Claire's identified something we all missed. Give her a moment to walk us through it properly." She'd bought me 30 seconds to breathe, to remember why I was there. Those 30 seconds saved my career. Now, sitting in my apartment at midnight, I stared at her LinkedIn profile, Executive Vice President of Operations, the woman who'd once told me, "Numbers don't lie. Claire, people do. Trust the data, always." My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Interesting message. Breakfast tomorrow before the meeting, 7 a.m., Marcus Hotel, L. Linda never forgot anything, including my personal cell from over a decade ago. The next morning, I arrived at the Marcus Hotel 15 minutes early. Linda was already there, sitting in a corner booth with clear sight lines to every entrance tactical seating, she'd called it. Some things never changed. "Claire," she stood, and we hugged briefly. She'd gone silver at the temples, adding gravitas to her already formidable presence. "You look tired." "You look exactly the same," I said, which was true. Linda had perfected corporate armor long before I'd learned to wear it. She studied me over her coffee cup. "I pulled the original Vanguard RFP we sent your firm. Very specific about our requirements. Comprehensive risk analysis, multi-scenario planning, regulatory compliance roadmaps. Strange how none of that appears in the deck your VP sent over yesterday." I said nothing. Linda didn't need me to fill silence. "I also found interesting discrepancies," she continued. "The energy consumption projections don't match any industry standards. The infrastructure costs seem to have vanished, and someone's assuming regulatory approvals that typically take 18 months will happen in 3 weeks. People make optimistic projections," I said carefully. "People or specific people." Linda pulled out her phone, showing me an email. "Your EVP Evan Rourke sent this yesterday. He's guaranteeing his word, ROI figures that would require us to violate at least 3 federal regulations and possibly the laws of physics." I sipped my coffee, maintaining eye contact. Linda leaned back. "Here's what concerns me. Claire, Vanguard is about to invest $300 million based on this presentation. If these numbers are wrong and they smell wrong, we're not just losing money. We're facing SEC investigations, shareholder lawsuits, potential criminal liability for fraud." "That would be unfortunate," I said. "Unfortunate," she laughed, sharp and knowing. "You always were a master of understatement. Let me be more direct. Does a complete, accurate analysis exist?" This was the moment. I could protect myself, stay silent, let Evan's disaster unfold naturally, or I could trust the woman who'd saved me once before. "Hypothetically," I said slowly, "if such a document existed, it would show risk factors that make the current proposal untenable without major restructuring. It would recommend a phased approach with multiple checkpoint evaluations. It would probably cut the projected ROI by 60% while actually increasing the likelihood of success. Hypothetically, that sounds like the kind of analysis Vanguard pays for, the kind we used to get from North Point before recent leadership changes. Leadership evolves, I said. Or devolves, Linda signaled for the check. Claire, I'm going to ask some very specific questions during today's presentation. Technical questions about methodology, data sources, calculation models, the kind of questions only someone who did the actual work could answer. Evan will handle all questions. He's made that clear. I'm sure he has. She stood, dropping cash on the table. One more thing. We're restructuring our internal strategic planning division. We need someone who understands the difference between analysis and advertising. Someone I can trust. She left without waiting for a response. Back at North Point, I found Evan in full performance mode, practicing his presentation in the mirror, adjusting his collar, rehearsing his opening joke, something about synergy that would have been dated in 2005. Claire, perfect timing. Make sure the slides auto-advance every 45 seconds. Keep the energy up, you know. Of course, I said, making the adjustment while creating a manual override only I could control. And remember, he pointed at me with finger guns, you're just there to click buttons. Don't speak unless someone asks about fonts or colors or something. The grown-ups will handle the real questions. I smiled. I wouldn't dream of it. At 9:55 a.m., we walked into the Vanguard conference room. Linda sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her board. Her expression was perfectly neutral, the kind of calm that preceded either a handshake or an execution. Evan, she said, voice warm as winter. We're all eager to hear how North Point plans to triple our ROI with no additional risk. Please, enlighten us. Evan's smile widened. He had no idea he was already bleeding. The Vanguard conference room was a study in corporate intimidation, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, a table that could double as a landing strip, and air conditioning set to morgue, the kind of room where careers went to die. Evan strode to the front like he owned it, all swagger and misplaced confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to witness the future of energy infrastructure investment. I took my position at the laptop, invisible as furniture, the role of the woman who clicks the slides. Perfect. The first 10 minutes went exactly as Evan planned. Gorgeous graphics dissolved into each other. Meaningless buzzwords floated across the screen. Paradigm shift. Revolutionary approach. Unprecedented returns. The board members nodded politely, their faces giving away nothing. Linda took notes on a legal pad, her handwriting invisible from my angle. Then slide 11 hit the screen. Revenue projections. As you can see, Evan gestured grandly, we're projecting 300% ROI within 18 months. Linda's pen stopped moving. Based on what assumptions? Market trends, obviously. The energy sector is exploding. Exploding. Linda's tone was perfectly flat. Could you be more specific? What demand calculations are you using? Evan's smile flickered. Well, we're using proprietary modeling. Whose proprietary modeling? Our team's, of course. Which team member specifically? I kept my eyes on the screen, fighting to keep my expression neutral. Evan glanced at me, a flash of panic quickly suppressed. It was a collaborative effort, he said. I see. Linda wrote something down. Move on. Slide 15, infrastructure costs, or rather, the absence of them. Notice how we've streamlined expenses, Evan said, confidence returning. By leveraging existing infrastructure. What existing infrastructure? Linda interrupted. Vanguard's current facilities are at 94% capacity. Where exactly are you leveraging? That's addressed in the appendix. There's no appendix in this presentation. Evan's face went slightly red. Claire, did you forget to include the appendix? All eyes turned to me. This was his first mistake, trying to throw me under the bus in front of Linda. The appendix was removed, I said calmly. You said it was too technical. The email instructing me to delete it was sent Tuesday at 3:47 p.m. Silence. Evan's mouth opened, then closed. Linda smiled, the kind of smile that made subordinates update their resumes. Let's continue. By slide 20, Evan was sweating despite the Arctic temperature. Every claim he made, Linda dissected. Every number he quoted, she questioned. She wasn't just poking holes in his presentation. She was performing an autopsy on it. This regulatory timeline, Linda said, studying slide 23. You're showing approval in 3 weeks for permits that took our last project 14 months. How? We have connections, streamlined processes. Are you suggesting we bypass federal regulations? No, of course not. Because that sounds like you're proposing we commit fraud. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. David Park, Vanguard's CFO, leaned forward. Evan, these energy consumption projections, they're 400% higher than any existing facility in the country. Are you using some new technology we should know about? Evan looked at me desperately. I clicked to the next slide without meeting his eyes. Perhaps, Linda said slowly, someone who actually worked on the analysis could clarify these points. Claire, you were the lead analyst on this project originally, weren't you? Evan stepped forward. Claire's role was purely administrative. I'm asking Ms. Mitchell. Linda's voice could have frozen flame. Claire, in your professional opinion, are these projections realistic? This was it, the moment where I could destroy him or save him. I looked at Evan, his face pale and pleading. Then I looked at Linda, waiting patiently for truth. In my professional opinion, I said clearly, achieving these projections would require Vanguard to violate federal regulations, ignore safety standards, and assume market conditions that have never existed in the history of the energy sector. The room erupted, board members talking over each other, David furiously flipping through pages, Linda writing calmly on her legal pad. Evan stood frozen at the front, his beautiful presentation still glowing behind him, a monument to his hubris. That's not Claire doesn't understand the bigger picture. Ms. Mitchell, Linda cut him off. Do you have documentation supporting your assessment? Yes. Recent documentation. Completed last week, before the modifications. I see. Linda closed her folder. Evan, I think we've heard enough. This meeting is concluded. North Point will be hearing from us soon. The dismissal was surgical in its precision. The board filed out without another word, leaving Evan, me, and the ghosts of his ambition in that freezing room. You sabotaged me, he whispered, face twisted with rage. No, I said, packing up the laptop. You sabotaged yourself. I just kept records. As I walked past him toward the door, he grabbed my arm. You're finished at North Point. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Evan, you just promised impossible returns to a Fortune 500 company. You guaranteed fraudulent projections with your name on every document. Who exactly do you think is finished? His grip loosened. The realization hit him like cold water. His signature was on everything. The promises, the guarantees, the deleted risk assessments. I left him standing there, alone with his pretty slides and the growing understanding that he'd just presented his own professional obituary. The aftermath moved with corporate efficiency, swift, silent, and devastating. By the time we returned to North Point, the emails were already flying. I watched from my desk as Evan stormed into Margaret's office, arms waving, voice carrying through the glass walls despite the soundproofing. Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching fear. She kept glancing at her computer screen, presumably reading messages from Vanguard's legal team. My phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez. What happened? Evan looks like he's having a stroke. I typed back, Vanguard asked questions. And he couldn't answer them. The next morning, Thursday, brought the first strike. An email marked Urgent Internal Review Required from Vanguard's legal department, sent to our entire C-suite, board of directors, and mysteriously, the legal compliance team. North Point Advisory has been notified of significant discrepancies in the proposal submitted for Project Titan. We require immediate clarification on data sources, methodology, and authorization for the projections presented. Additionally, we are initiating a comprehensive review of all strategic recommendations made by North Point in the past 6 months. 6 months, exactly how long Evan had been VP. By noon, our legal department had commandeered Conference Room A. I walked past on my way to lunch and saw them spreading out documents across the table. Evan's presentations lined up like evidence in a murder trial. Jennifer Wu, our chief legal counsel, looked like she'd aged 5 years since morning. Evan, meanwhile, had gone into damage control mode. He called an emergency meeting of the strategy team minus me. Of course, through the glass, I watched him pace and gesture, probably spinning some story about Vanguard's unreasonable expectations or hostile questioning. That's when I made my move. I knocked on Jennifer Wu's door. "Jennifer, you might need these." I handed her a USB drive. Original versions of all modified presentations from the last 6 months, with change tracking enabled. She looked at the drive, then at me. "Claire, are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure I want to protect the firm from liability. Every altered risk assessment, every deleted warning, every inflated projection, it's all there, with timestamps and digital signatures." Jennifer's face went pale as she scrolled through the files. Jesus Christ. He removed entire sections on regulatory compliance. Page 47 of the original Thornton analysis. Page 23 of the Meridian report. Page 31 of Vanguard. Should I continue? "Does Margaret know?" "She's about to." That afternoon, while Evan was still rallying his troops, Jennifer Wu walked into Margaret's office with 2 senior partners from legal. They were in there for 3 hours. Through the glass, I could see Margaret's face cycle through the stages of grief denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, a cold acceptance. At 4:47 p.m., an email went out from Margaret to all staff. Effective immediately, all client presentations must be reviewed and approved by legal compliance before submission, no exceptions. Evan must have felt the noose tightening, because he tried one last desperate play. He appeared at my desk at 5:15 when most of the office had left. "Claire, we need to talk." I kept typing. Look, we both know Vanguard overreacted, but if we present a united front, explain that there was a miscommunication. A miscommunication. I finally looked up. Is that what we're calling fraud now? It's not fraud if we fix it before anything's signed. Evan, you guaranteed those numbers, in writing, with your signature. He leaned on my desk, trying for intimidating but achieving desperate. "What do you want? Your old title back, a raise, name it?" "I want you to understand something," I said, standing to face him. "This isn't about what I want. This is about what happens when you treat expertise like it's disposable, when you think you can fake competence with pretty pictures, when you gamble with other people's careers because you're too arrogant to admit what you don't know. You self-righteous—" "I'd be very careful about your next words," I interrupted, considering I'm probably the only person who can explain to Vanguard how those projections were actually calculated, or weren't, in your case. His face went through several shades of red before settling on a defeated gray. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's just beginning." That night, I updated my insurance folder one last time. Adding the security footage of Evan at my desk, our IT department was very helpful when properly motivated and sent a backup to my attorney. Friday morning brought the second strike, a formal notice from Vanguard requesting immediate remediation meeting with senior leadership and the original analysis team. They wanted answers, and they wanted them from people who actually had them. The meeting was scheduled for Monday. Evan wasn't invited. I spent the weekend preparing something special, my original Vanguard analysis, restored to its full 40-page glory, with a new addition, a detailed addendum showing exactly how each risk factor had been eliminated from the final presentation, who had authorized each change, and what the potential legal and financial implications were for both companies. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance, every page a nail in Evan's professional coffin. Sunday night, Linda texted me, "Bring copies for everyone, and Claire dress for a promotion." I smiled, selecting my best suit, the charcoal one that said Senior Leadership, without screaming it. Evan had taught me something valuable in corporate warfare. Presentation matters. But unlike him, I had substance to back up my style. Monday arrived like an execution date. The senior leadership team gathered in the boardroom at 8 a.m. sharp. Margaret Walsh, Jennifer Wu, our CFO Richard Hayes, and 3 board members who'd flown in specifically for this meeting. Evan sat at the far end of the table, isolated, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. I'd never seen our boardroom this tense. The coffee sat untouched, the pastries ignored. Everyone was waiting for Vanguard's arrival like defendants awaiting a verdict. At 8:30 they entered, Linda led the delegation 5 executives including David Park and Vanguard's general counsel, a woman named Patricia Chen, who looked like she ate corporate lawsuits for breakfast. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Linda began, not even sitting down. "Vanguard is prepared to terminate our entire relationship with North Point Advisory, effective immediately." Margaret's face went white. "Linda, surely we can—" "The proposal you submitted wasn't just wrong, Margaret, it was fraudulent. We're looking at potential SEC violations, shareholder lawsuits, and criminal liability if we'd acted on those recommendations." Patricia Chen opened her briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. "We've identified 43 instances of material misrepresentation in your submission. 43. "There must be some misunderstanding," Evan interjected, voice cracking slightly. Linda's gaze could have cut glass. "The only misunderstanding was North Point thinking we wouldn't verify your numbers. Did you really believe we'd invest $300 million without due diligence?" "If I may," I said quietly. All heads turned to me. Margaret looked confused I wasn't supposed to be speaking, but Linda nodded. I distributed copies of my restored analysis. This was the original risk assessment for Project Titan. Every concern Vanguard raised was identified and documented. The regulatory timeline issues, the infrastructure gaps, the energy consumption impossibilities, it's all here. David Park flipped through the pages. "This is excellent work. Thorough, realistic, actionable." He looked up. "Why wasn't this submitted?" I let the silence stretch just long enough. The analysis was deemed too pessimistic, too academic, not aligned with the new vision. "Whose vision?" Patricia Chen asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. I looked directly at Evan. "Mr. Rourke felt the original was too detailed. He instructed me to create something more optimistic." "That's not— I never said fraudulent," Evan stammered. Jennifer Wu slid a paper across the table. "Email from you to Claire. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. Quote, remove all the doom and gloom, make it sell. I don't care if the numbers need adjusting." End quote. The room went silent except for the sound of Patricia Chen typing on her laptop. "Here's what's going to happen," Linda said. "North Point will void the current proposal. You'll submit a new one based on Ms. Mitchell's original analysis, and Mr. Rourke will have no involvement whatsoever." "That's not your decision to make," Margaret said weakly. "No, but it is mine." Richard Hayes, our CFO, spoke for the first time. "I've seen the liability exposure. Evan, you're done. Clear your desk." "You can't, Margaret." Evan looked desperately at the CEO. His lifeline. Margaret wouldn't meet his eyes. "The board will need your resignation by end of day." What happened next was pure Evan no grace, no dignity. "This is her fault." He pointed at me. "She sabotaged the presentation. She's been undermining me since day one." "The only person who undermined you," Linda said coldly, "was yourself.